Welcome to The Rabbi and the Shrink. I am Dr. Margarita Guri, known as Dr. Red Shoe, and this is
Rabbi Yonason Goldson.
My favorite rabbi. And today we have someone who's changing the world. It's Michael Patrick Mulroy, and to make life easier, he is Mick. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Boy, so are we. We're very excited about it. Mick is bringing back not only the idea of stoicism in the military, but he's working on ending conflicts and helping those affected by the issue of child soldiering. He has a website with a donate button so that you can help, and I'll put that in the link. But he's been a big shot, the Deputy Assistant Director of Defense under Secretary Mattis, which is amazing. He was in the CIA. He's a decorated Marine. And more than that, he's an advocate for child soldiers and for what's good and right in the world. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I think that some would say that indicates I can't hold a job, but I appreciate you saying trying to change the world. I like that.
I don't think you're trying. I think you are saving the world. I think you're actively doing what most people want to do. You've somehow managed to do it.
I appreciate that.
I love your initiative. Why don't you tell us how you go from being a Marine to now doing all of this amazing stuff? Tell us a little bit about your journey, sir.
So I enlisted in the Marine Corps close to right out of high school, and then really liked it. It appealed to me for several reasons. Then I became an officer, and then I was recruited into the CIA, right? So didn't know anything about it until it happened. And then right during training, 9/11 happened. It was obviously an emotional thing for all Americans. But I was at the training site at the farm when it happened. So we watched the buildings come down together. And quite frankly, it was really something that we all accepted as a massive intelligence failure. So for somebody who was in the CIA at the time, it was on us to make right. And so I spent my whole career, I was what's called a paramilitary operations officer, which is a long term for basically the special operations side of the CIA. And so I spent almost all my career in conflicts, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, places like that. So, through that, obviously our job there was more of a combatant, not one trying to end it, but me as well as my partner, Eric Ulrich, who was a Navy SEAL, when we got out, we wanted to do things that led more toward the ending of these endless conflicts and getting at the root of the issue, which is many times is poverty. And so that's what we wanted to focus on. So we worked for ABC News, we worked for several think tanks, and that's what we do. And then part of that is the issue of child soldiers, which you've already mentioned, because we became intimately familiar with the plight of these children, having served in so many of these places. And we did a documentary on one and really became close with them. So that's an issue that, I hope we can talk about today, because it's one of those issues that I think everybody wants to get behind, but there isn't a lot out there. And so we can talk about that more.
So we'll start off with our in our viewers, we have Malcolm who's saying thank you for your service. And I know all of our viewers thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so the documentary, for anyone who wants to know, I'll put the name in the chat. It's called, I just erased it.
My Star in the Sky.
Yes. I'm just trying to put the link on here. There.
Right.
Whoops. I put the wrong link. I'll get it right. But I think that now you have somebody, Mark Sullivan, who's making it into a book. So please tell us, what do we need to know about ending conflict and keeping our children safe? What do we need to know?
So the first part of ending conflict, I did reference this. I mean, in many of these places, there is zero economic opportunity, zero. And so the young men in particular, when they have zero economic opportunity and way ahead, often join extremist groups, to be quite frank. And that's in every culture and every religion and every society we've ever had on on the earth. So it's not unique to them. So one of the things is we're going to have to try to change the situation on the ground in places like Yemen and Syria. So, I mean, I know that's a pretty lofty goal, but it's a goal that we all should have. On the issue of child soldiers, it has, I think, the last paper we did, we cited the United Nations. The issue has doubled in the Middle East in 1 year. So in 2019, the number of children being forced to be soldiers doubled. Worldwide, there's about 100,000 kids that are currently under arms.
That's horrible.
Right. I mean, warfare is bad enough, but if adults are going to start them, adults should fight them, is what I say. And these kids essentially either have no option, and they go there to try to raise money for their family, or they're actually abducted. And the documentary we did was about kids that were actually abducted. They had no choice. And the Lord's Resistance Army, which is the army that we did the documentary on, they became infamous because almost their entire army was made up of children. Oftentimes there's children in an army, but they don't compose almost the entirety of the army. So the Lord's Resistance Army was one that was infamous for that fact.
That's just terrible. So then the journey go ahead. I'm sorry, Rabbi.
Thank you. One of the ideas that I've given a lot of thought to over the years is, when it comes to conflict, very few people wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to be evil today. Most of us rationalize all of our decisions. And when you see people in conflict, no matter how brutal it looks, no matter how one-sided it looks, each party probably has some justification for why what I'm doing is okay. And when it comes to this sort of abduction and child soldiers, it's awfully hard to get inside the head of the people who are perpetrating this, to understand how can they rationalize this? How can they live with themselves? Is that something that you've approached, you've addressed, or you've witnessed to any degree? An answer to that question?
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why, the global war on terror, or whatever we're calling it today, is so difficult to actually win, right? Because it's an ideology. It's a philosophy, albeit warped, albeit one that was essentially made up. Every group like this has to have some kind of ideology to justify their actions, even if they're unjustifiable, right? So they've created an alternate, in the case of Islamic terrorism, they create an alternate of Islam. It's not Islam, it's a warped version. And then they essentially tell their followers they have to follow them because it's a higher reason, right? When it comes to kids, that's adults. And again, this isn't specific to any one religion. We've seen extremist groups in every religion and a religious. But when it comes to kids, one of the reasons why they're so used is kids have a natural tendency to do what adults tell them, right? Most adults will argue with other adults. Most adults will have differing opinions. Kids in general, if you tell them this is what they're going to do, they do it. And that's one of the, so hard to get them back out of these type of groups, whether it's like the group I already mentioned, where they use this mystical kind of way to tell the kids that they had to do it because their ancestors were talking to them. And we can go deeper into that, but that was Lords of Resistance armies in many ways. Or like the Cubs of the Caliphate in Syria, where these ISIS orphans are now becoming the next generations of fighters because their mothers and their uncles and all the other adults in their family are telling them it's essentially their lineage and they have to avenge their parents. So it's, to your point, Rabbi, it's an incredibly difficult thing to defeat because you can defeat a person, but not necessarily, a philosophy. And it's really trying to get to a point where people understand that these are very toxic philosophies and that it is not the way for them, not just for the rest of humanity, but for them. Part of it's also, becoming more tribal in nature, I think, is a problem, where it's not about right or wrong. It's about whether my tribe is more successful than your tribe. And I think that is another issue that we're dealing with, not only in the places I mentioned, but also right here at home, right? So in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, as our politics have become more like that. I mean, we have a word, identity politics, but even just, Republicans, Democrats. I think if we would go back and examine what they actually believed in when they started those parties, what liberal and conservative meant when those terms were developed, there wouldn't be this kind of acrimony. But as you say, it's become ideological, it's become tribal, and it's very hard to see a way out once you get to that point.
And
I agree. And
you have come up with a wonderful, comprehensive approach. Please start with the stoicism and the value ethics and what you're doing to try and make a huge difference so that we can help you.
Yeah, so when it comes to stoicism, I was essentially, I was raised a Stoic. It's kind of odd. Some people are Presbyterian. I was a Stoic, which got a little odd looks when I grew up in a rural part of the South. But my dad taught us ethics based on Greek philosophy, and Stoicism was the kind of natural part of the Socratic philosophies that I clung to. Stoicism, for those who don't know it, is what we believe is a direct descendant of Socrates' view of the world. It preaches things like, not preaches, that's a bad, it's not a religion. It holds the principles to be wisdom, courage, moderation, which is not often talked about quite a bit, and justice. Those are the 4 principles. And it really focuses on your virtue, your own soul, if you will, more important than any material good that you could ever possess. And it really de-emphasizes the material. It's essentially a philosophy, not unlike many religions, but it gives you the ability to every day wake up and try to do better than you did the day before, right? So it's a forgiving philosophy, but the whole point, and I've had examples of this, if you say you follow the philosophy, then every day you're going to be given opportunities to prove it. And if you don't, then you have to answer to yourself. And that's another part of Stoicism. It's what they call journalism, but it's basically being honest to yourself. And Marcus Aurelius is probably the most famous journalist, Stoic ever, in Meditations, if you ever want to read a good Stoic piece of literature. But anyway, so to your point, Doc, I am an amateur. I'm not a PhD or anything, but I became involved in a movement to get the U.S. military to use Stoicism essentially as their virtue ethic backbone. It's a natural fit. It's a natural fit for military people. It's not a military philosophy, but it just happens to be closely associated. So myself, Donald Robertson, I would say Lieutenant General McMaster just did a Georgetown professor who was phenomenal, and I'll come back to her name, just did a conference on the issue. Nancy Sherman. She's probably the most important Luther I just met. She's taught at the Naval Academy. She's really done a lot of work in the area of integrating Stoicism into the military. So Nancy Sherman, myself, and Donald Robertson, General McMaster, just did a conference really pushing it. I think it's an open door, quite frankly, and most people in the military is like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. So we just have to try to get it formalized.
I just put her book. She has a book called Stoic Wisdom, Ancient Lessons for Modern Resilience. And I put that in the chat to support what Mick was saying. That is awesome. I mean, what got you started on this mission? I mean, I know you don't call it a mission, but it seems like a mission to me. It's an awesome mission. What got you started on this?
So, I mean, I've always read about Stoicism growing up. It was a part of my, as I mentioned, some people are, Protestant, Presbyterian, whatever. I was always Stoic. So I always read about it. And then as I got out of the CIA and out of my job at the Pentagon, I had a little more time. So I read more about it. And then I just got involved, and people asked me to write papers on it. And I wrote I think the first paper was about the need to get back to teaching ethics in school. I think the rabbi might have something to say about that. Because, we don't do that often anymore, where we really make one of the pillars of our educational system about ethics, not just about science and technology and math, which are all important. But I think the paper was spurred by, there was a statistical study on the fact that Americans just don't consider this an ethical country anymore. This is self-reflection, right? So that I wrote a paper, and I use stoicism as a model to use. There's a lot of other philosophies you could use, but it's just the one I happen to know. And then from there, I just got involved in this really growing movement. I think there's been a lot written about the fact that stoicism has really caught on in the modern world, and we hope to bring it to a lot more people.
You said one thing there that really resonated with me. And of course, the whole issue of ethics is why we're here in the first place. Mm-hmm. And many people can't define the word. Mm-hmm. And even if I have my definition, many others will have different definitions. And this is part of the problem. But you mentioned being accountable to oneself. And that really cuts to the heart of the issue. Because it is definitely helpful and utilitarian to have a society that holds by ethical standards, to have a society. It's interesting, in Jewish law, the Torah teaches capital punishment. Yeah. But in order to administer capital punishment or corporal punishment, you had to have two witnesses. Those witnesses had to have warned the perpetrator. As they saw somebody about to commit a criminal offense, they had to tell him, what you're doing is a criminal offense. You will be punished. They had to know the punishment and tell him and warn him that's what he was facing. He had to respond. He had to say, I know, and then do it anyway within about 3 seconds. And if you didn't have all those criteria, the court could not administer punishment. And on the surface, it seems ludicrous. How does anybody ever get punished? But the presumption was you have a society where people believe in the values of their belief system. And why does anybody commit a crime? Because I've lost focus, because I'm in the heat of the moment, because I don't have clarity. And I just need someone to bring me back down to earth, into focus. And then, of course, I'm not going to follow through. And so the whole reason for having a legal system was not to enforce the law per se, but to create a structure where people were conscious of the values that they all shared. And so ultimately, it does come down to being accountable to myself. I have to have firm values. I have to know what I believe in. I have to know why I believe in it. And then I have to rise to the occasion and say, I am going to live according to my values. And
it's hard enough to do.
Yeah, and the challenge for us today seems to be that whole structure is disintegrating.
I think people don't have the clarity about what is expected and what is valued. I think people have gotten into what's good for me, or they've gotten into survival mode and stopped to create their own sense of what they need to do. I included, I love the name, A Case for a Philosopher King. I included that link in the chat if you want to check, those of you who are on now. Tell us, please, about your article, because the Rabbi speaks always very passionately, and I think that you're saying some of the same stuff. Please talk to us about the Philosopher King.
Yes, the idea of Philosopher King, the paper, and I already mentioned, it cites the statistics of what Americans think about America and our ethical, values now. But it pushes one to get it back into the schools. I think we've seen, I think you all have mentioned, a breakdown often, recently, quite frankly, in a lot of elements of society where people, when they don't like the outcome of something, they just take the law into their own hands. And if that keeps happening, we don't really have a society, right? Part of being in a society is accepting the rules as is, whether you win, lose, or draw, right? But to your point, I propose teaching ethics in many ways, but through the examples of others. So I think I don't have the paper in front of me, but I use people like Marcus Aurelius, but also modern people like John Lewis, and people that we can all agree, I hope, represent people that we would want our kids to emulate, and teach them that way, because it's also telling a story. And I just personally think people learn better from stories. But so we actually have models of people that we can look to, men and women, throughout our history, that hold up the virtues that we want to see in our kids. And it's not just to teach history about facts of who did what when, but it's their representation and them doing the right thing, even when that right thing might not have been the best thing for them, right? So again, using John Lewis as an example, when he was almost killed during the civil rights era. But there's examples that we can use throughout our history. And I think that would be one of the better ways to teach ethics to kids, than they would remember it.
And I like that you're one of the few people, when we're talking about ethics, that includes women as examples. So we have Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King and John McCain and John Lewis, great guys, right? But then you have Harriet Tubman, Mary Walker, Rosa Parks, and Jane Addams. Yay, thank you. I mean, why is it we always forget the woman, right? And I think that it's important that we get people with various perspectives. The Rabbi and I were talking about that one of the issues for diversity for us has to do with diversity of thought. And our experiences obviously inform our thoughts, and our thoughts inform our experiences. But thank you for being capturing attentions from a variety of different people who teach us how to do it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I guess one of them, I don't know if it's controversial things I do talk about when it comes to philosophy, is it's not just that we want to make sure everybody's included, but we absolutely, as a society, need more female voices in leadership, period. I'm not saying that just to try to, make friends with the female audience. I mean, I spent my entire career in conflicts, right? And 99 or 100% of those conflicts were quite frankly caused and decided by men. So we've had a lot of time in the leadership role. And I think that's potentially why human history is simply earmarked by warfare. I think we ought, as a society, ought to push for the good of society to have more diverse opinions in leadership, and particularly women.
I agree. I agree with that, and I think that different points of view. So one of the goals that Rabbi and I have is help other people listen to other points of view without being disrespectful or closing our minds. We have something from Aya. I think there are lots of lessons to learn from nature. Is there any special lesson also for you from nature during your experiences in the military, in the Marines?
So nature, what do you mean?
It's an interesting question. I think she's talking about how we learn from nature.
Natural world, I suppose, laws of nature.
The natural world, okay. Well, I mean, there's a concept in stoicism that goes back to Arcadia, where we get the term, where if you are closer to your original nature, you are better off. So if that's what she's asking about, I'm a big believer in that. That could be anything from as mundane as your diet to your mental health. From the military, I just talked to somebody who's writing a book about civility in modern society, and she's talking about human nature, and she basically had a much more positive view of human nature than I did. So I know this isn't exactly the point of the question, but human nature is both really good and really bad. We're one of the few species that actively goes and tries to kill our own species.
Yeah.
Like systematically, try to advance technology to do just that. So I differ than her in that human nature is naturally one of goodness. I think it's both, and I think we're almost in a constant. There's a famous quote by Plato: and a constant struggle between the two of what are both sides of human nature. And so to the point of the question, is there things in nature that I see that we should take into modern society or the military? Yeah. And there's things in human nature that we should try to avoid. And I think that is this what seems the desire to be tribal and try to take from others.
One of my favorite teachings of the sages is that at the end of our lives, every one of us will be shown what we call the evil inclination, our predisposition or our natural predilection towards evil. And a righteous person will be shown his, and he will see a mountain. And he'll wonder, how did I ever scale that mountain? And a wicked person will be shown a little smudge on the ground. And he'll ask himself, how was I not able to get past that?
Right.
And it seems so counterintuitive, but what it's telling us is that what makes a person righteous is that when the nature to do evil pushes us, we push back. When we push back, we get stronger. When we get stronger, the nature to do evil has to get stronger in order to preserve free will. And so the righteous person over a lifetime, with every conflict, every decision point, gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and never notices developing into a person of tremendous righteousness. Whereas the person who's evil, when the inclination to do evil pushes, he topples over. And so it doesn't have to get stronger. And he just keeps losing the same battle over and over again. And over a lifetime, he just stays right where he is. And if we would simply summon the resolve, not necessarily to conquer evil, but just to struggle with it, then naturally we would become stronger and our capacity for good would increase.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, for me, it's not, so the person who naturally wants to do good, I think that's a good thing. But the person who, you know, is more like the average person who has inclinations to do good or bad, but chooses to do good, they're in many ways more impressive, right? Yes. Because they are fighting against that desire to do. And then every day they do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. I think they do get stronger. And that's what you are. At the end of the day, you are your actions. So you know, there's a famous, you know, be who you desire to be, right? So you claim that you want to be this person, you need to be this person. And, you know, I whether it's a little thing or a big thing, I can tell you, the other day we were driving out to the mountain around here to go hiking with my wife, and there was a guy, obviously handicapped, walking down the road, going the other direction. And, you know, I drove past him, I kind of justified he's going the other direction. And then, you know, I was like, you know what? I'm about to do a podcast on ethics. I had to turn around. I mean, I literally had to turn around, you know, and quite frankly, you know, we had a certain amount of time to hike and a certain amount of time. I didn't know where the guy was going to end up wanting to go, but, you know, and it's a small thing, you know, it's no gold star moment just to turn around.
Well, but you did good, and doing good, it doesn't matter how big it is.
Yeah. I turned around. I drove all the way back. I didn't want to ride.
Just the opposite.
The point is, you know, you have to hold yourself accountable, and that's a small thing. But even big things, you're gonna be in a situation in life, and I tell this to a lot of my kids and godkids, where you're gonna have a choice to do the right thing or the wrong thing, and no matter what the benefit is, the only thing that will matter to you at the end is whether you did the right thing. Period.
Absolutely. So how do we teach? Oh, go ahead, Rabbi.
You pick the allegory you choose. The beach is made up of countless grains of sand, and the sea is made up of countless drops of water, and the forest is made up of countless tiny leaves. Life is made up of countless small moments. And every time I have a choice to make. Never say it's too small. Never say it's just not important, because those little moments add up. and transform us into the people that we choose to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, in terms of the practical world, let's say I have a business, I have a family, I have a community, and I want to be better and I want to embrace stoicism and value ethics. Please give us some starts. Where do we start with what we think, feel, and do?
So the first thing I would say, because stoicism, if you just like the word stoic, you think, oh, like this person who doesn't have a lot of emotion, in the negative sense. Well, it's not that. So stoicism, it really pushes to take life as you get it, and not to bow down. And if you get knocked down, which you will, you'll stand back up. So that's what they mean by that. That's the term stoic. It's not emotionalist. So if you're an emotional person, don't think, well, I can't be a stoic. The other thing is it's generally tied to the military because it was the philosophy of the Roman Empire for so long. It is not a military philosophy. The biggest adherents, the pinnacles of stoicism run from a Roman emperor to a slave. Epictetus was a slave. In fact, his name meant slave. And he is held up in highest regard as the Roman Empire of Aurelius, right? Emperor of Aurelius. So don't look at any of those things as reasons not to do it, not to become involved, not to read about it. There's a lot. Modern Stoicism is a group that does a lot of work on it. But I would start with some of the core principles of reading about Zeno. And I don't want to wax too long on this, but Zeno is a good way that Stoicism started, just to shorten the story. He was a very rich person back in ancient Greece who had all of his belongings on several ships, and he was sailing to his new mansion, and they sunk. So they didn't have insurance back then. So you went from really rich guy to guy with a cloak on his back. And he swam to shore, and he, instead of going up to the first, restaurant, if you will, he happened to walk into a bookstore. And the person was talking about Socrates. And he became enamored. Even though he just lost everything he owned, he became enamored with the person talking about Socrates. And he asked the person who was talking, where do I find such men? And the guy, he thought pointed at him, but he was actually pointing over his shoulder. And it was one of Socrates' students. And so Zeno then walked with one of the Socrates students. Socrates was already executed by then, to Athens, and he started the school of Stoicism. So that's kind of the origin story. And it is one of the reasons why Stoics do so de-emphasize, not that they're against wealth, but they de-emphasize the importance of it. It really, truly is about the core of who you are. And then there's Epictetus and Seneca, and obviously Marcus Aurelius is one that are talked about quite a bit. And to your point on the philosopher king, so I use Marcus Aurelius for a reason. Marcus Aurelius at the time was the most powerful man in the world, and one could argue the most powerful man that ever lived. He had the entirety of the Roman Empire, period. Anything at his disposal. Yet he slept on a straw mat. He went with his forces into the field and ate their rations, and he wrote critical things about himself and his need to be a better person. So, I use him not because he was better than, there's plenty of people that were better than Aurelius, and he'd be the first one to tell you that, but that he had everything at his disposal and chose that way rather than exploiting everything that he had under his power. So anyway, if people are interested in Stoicism, it is not a replacement for religion or anything like that. So one can be anything and follow Stoicism. And it, as for me, has been a great model in life.
I would like to share a story. I was debating whether or not to, but I think just in light of this discussion, it's valuable. There's a Jewish legend that it was during a time when the Romans had imposed all sorts of decrees against the Jews, one of which was they prohibited circumcision. And there was a prominent man and his wife, and they had a boy, and against the Roman decree, they went ahead and they performed the circumcision on the 8th day, and they were caught. The husband managed to escape, but the wife was caught with a baby. And so the arresting soldier accompanied this woman with her newborn baby to Rome. to be tried in front of the emperor for violating his decree. And they're in the outskirts of Rome, and they stayed in an inn. All Jewish stories seem to happen in inns. And there's a Roman noblewoman there with a newborn baby boy. And so, of course, some things are universal. They start comparing babies. And the noblewoman says, "You came all the way from the land of Israel a week after giving birth? What would prompt you to do such a thing?" She said, "Well, I didn't have a choice. I'm going to be standing in front of the Roman emperor tomorrow on trial." "Well, why?" She explains, "Well, it's ridiculous." And then the Roman noblewoman said, "Here, let's trade babies. You'll take my baby in front of the Roman emperor, and he'll see that there's no circumcision, and he'll let you off." And that's what happened. She went in front of the Roman emperor and said, "Do you violate my decree?" And the woman said, "See for yourself. If he wasn't circumcised, he let her go free." Came back. The women stayed in touch. They became friends. They became correspondents. The Roman noblewoman's baby grew up to be Marcus Aurelius.
Ah,
I'm totally going to use that story, Rabbi. Just so you know,
a great story.
I wasn't there. I can't vouch for its authenticity, but this is part of our tradition. And the Jewish baby grew up to be Rabbi Judah the Prince, who was the one who codified Jewish law.
Wow.
And our history records that they were correspondents, but they actually became friends.
Talk about synchronicity. Wow.
They were the two wealthiest men in the world.
Wow.
Right.
And the two most influential men of their generation.
Wow.
That's a great story.
That's a great story. Amazing. Well, certainly people can be very kind and resourceful. I do believe at heart most people want to do good. And it sounds like, Mick, you believe that at your core. Maybe you're not naive about it, but you believe that. So what are the next steps, sir? Let's talk about next steps, and then we'll do the word of the day. What are the next steps for you, for us? What needs doing?
So on the Stoicism, I think the next step for the group, and I don't speak for it's a collective of people that are all interested in this, is to try to get this in the military, our military, U.S. military, as something that is a living, breathing part of being a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine like I was. And that's only going to come with the adaptation of the Stoic principles. We all have ethics in some form or another in the military, but we think this ties us to our own history. So it's not like we just made it up last week and gave it a cool acronym. This is something that is part of Western civilization. It started at the same time democracy started, right? So it's really embedded. So that's what I think the intent of that is. And again, with Nancy Sherman, I would say being our leader on that. And then on the child soldiering issue, we've worked closely with one called Grassroots Reconciliation Group. It's a group that helps the former soldiers in the Lord's Resistance Army get rehabilitated back in society. But that's specific to East Africa. So the End Child Soldiering NGO that Eric and I started, is funded by Mark Sullivan, is international. So it's going to cover conflicts from the Philippines to Syria to... Is
that the one from the Lobo Institute? So I can put that in?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's called End Child Soldiering. It's about to get its 501c3 status. It is funded by the book, so we've been able to do stuff now. But it is our intent is it's going to be a Gold Star charity. Nobody receives a salary from the charity. It comes in, it goes to the people that we have found on the ground that are out there doing stuff that might not have a chance to come back to the United States and raise money, but that's what they're doing.
And it's wonderful that you're connected with the Gold Star organizations. That's wonderful.
We do a lot with our own Gold Star families here, quite frankly. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to continue to do that. But I would say that regardless of whether you support Grassroots Reconciliation Group or End Child Soldiering, there's another one called Romeo Dallaire. If you guys saw the movie Hotel Rwanda, He was the UN general in that. He has created an outstanding organization that deals with kids that have been forced to be soldiers. The other thing you could do, if funding isn't your inclination, is demand that your governments adhere to the laws. We have a law in the United States that specifically prevents us from dealing with countries that have child soldiers. And there's all these UN protocols that all these countries have signed on to and then ignore. So I would just say, hold your elected officials accountable, saying, look, it's unacceptable to have kids fight wars, period. Don't start them, don't confine them. We probably should end them all, but if we're going to do it, it shouldn't be the kids that are fighting. And that has a huge effect, because there isn't a politician out there or anybody I've ever met that say, no, I think we should support the use of children as soldiers. Nobody would say that. So we got to stop giving waivers to countries that do it, and we got to hold our folks accountable and tell them that as your representative, you find that unacceptable, that we should give any countries waivers to do something like this.
Well, and they can find all of this in the logoinstitute.org. I put the link already in the chat. And I think that's amazing. I urge everyone to read the paper as well. And I put the link of your paper. I loved your paper. I thought it was simple to read, compelling, very clear. I think people have stoicism in their hearts. I don't think they have the clarity of what it is. And if it's more clear, obviously it's easier to follow. So I think you're doing a great service, sir, once again, to our nation and to the world, I think. So thank you.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate it.
All right, good, Rabbi. Rabbi picked a great word of the day for you because he thought it would fit. I don't even know what it means, but I just put it in the link. Rabbi, this is all yours, sir.
Well, when I was, a junior in college, I saw a wonderful performance of Voltaire's play Candide. And Candide is a disciple of a professor by the name of Professor Pangloss, Dr. Pangloss. Now, the name Pangloss, gloss means glossed over, to be superficial. Pan means universal. So the name is actually, in Voltaire's cleverness, it represents this pervasive superficiality. And Professor Pangloss promoted an idea. He said, how many possible worlds are there? One, ours. And therefore, we live in the best of all possible worlds.
True.
I was thinking of choosing Pollyanna as a similar type of idea. But while Voltaire was a bit of a cynic, there is something a little more substantive to this philosophy. And I think it ties in with Stoicism. The philosophy of acceptance, of moderation, of not trying to make things more than they are, different from how they are. It doesn't mean we don't want to improve the world. It doesn't mean we don't want to improve ourselves. But there's always this tension. It's part of the human paradox that we want to accept the way things are, even while we hold on to the mission, the desire, the vision of making things better. It's like the tranquility prayer, right? Give me the strength to endure what I can't change, the ability to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so to be a little bit Panglossian, I think is useful, and I think aligns with Stoicism. And at the same time, to never let it devolve into apathy, where I simply say things are the way they are and there's nothing I can do about it. Going too far to either extreme, as in most things, is not going to serve us. Trying to find that balance, even though it's a perpetual tension between the two, that's okay, because tension generally stimulates growth and progress. I
agree. One of the tenets of Stoicism is, change starts with yourself, right? That's the one thing you can control. You can't control, exactly, political parties and all the nonsense that goes on there, but you can change yourself. So, and if you change yourself, in a way, you do change the world because you're a part of it. So exactly. I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mick, for your service and all the good work you're doing and for spending time with us.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
sir.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate it. This has been a great talk.
And please, sir,
Really
let us
good.
know what we can do, the rabbi and I, but also the audience. So what can we do to be of service to this amazing cause? It's a global cause and also for our nation. And I think it's a good thing to focus on.
And Doctor, you have a last word for us.
Well, I think that the last word would be follow up on the stoicism idea. Virtue ethics is about character, and we build character one step at a time. One mistake that we understand, one falsehood. As my father once said when I was very disappointed in myself, I had done something that wasn't good. I forget what it was, and he said to me what I'm going to say, everyone. Now, everyone say, I'm wonderful. Let me hear it. I'm wonderful.
Wonderful.
And now say, I'm awful. And then you say, I'm awful. And then he said to me, get over it. You're both. And I think that the whole point of knowing that the human condition is about falling down, getting up again, falling down and getting up again. It is a constant action. It's not even just a struggle. It's just the way it is. And we can be one mistake away from amazingness, right? So I urge everyone to donate. We have the links. I urge everyone to know that they can be the best they can be. If we understand stoicism, we can behave in a way that feels like we're on to a shared mission. And I think it's better than being all alone. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on this mission. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, and this is Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and we're here with Mick Mulroy. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 12:30 ET. Thank you all.